how do we turn what we've been learning about all semester into change, into social action, right? Well, it starts by understanding our social institutions. So all semester we've been engaging with various kinds of social institutions. A social institution is a part of the social structure that is meant to help society meet a basic social need. So we have these needs as a society, right? Like we need to make sure that we're able to pass on knowledge to the next generation, right? That's a need that human society has. So we've developed a social institution that helps us meet the need of passing on knowledge, right? We call it education. And sure, education has looked different at different times in history. It's been, useful or ineffective at various times, but it is the institution we've created to help pass on knowledge, right? So some of the most basic social institutions that societies develop first are government, right? Some form of leadership or decision-making or protection. Most societies then develop an economic institutions, right? A system of exchanging, food or goods or services, right? Religion is another basic human social institution about meeting the social need that we have of like a sense of purpose, like a why are we here kind of a thing. Family, the social institution that sets rules for procreation or the situation under which procreation is managed, right? It's our institution that raises children and provides responsibilities for caretakers and things like that. And then education, as I mentioned, is about passing on knowledge or skills, that sort of thing. As societies become more advanced, they develop other kinds of social institutions. These are just like the basic ones. Certainly we have institutions like science or the media or medicine or the military, which are much more advanced and complex than a simple exchange institution for economic purpose. As we become more technologically advanced and complex, we develop the Industrial Revolution had us change, very much how we approach science and actually all four of these, right? Media, medicine, and the military. But they each still meet basic social needs, right? Like protection, or healing us when we're sick, or providing us with information, or advancing our understandings of the world, right? All of these are important. They're just more complex. So, in sociology, as a science, as a social science, there is a general understanding called functionalism. Right? Functionalism believes that all the parts of society have to work together in order for society to be harmonious, for it to be working properly, to function, right? And so the functionalist perspective points out that there is an interdependence between social institutions. Just like in the human body, right? We have all these organs that contribute to you being alive and functioning, right? But if one of your organs fails, eventually they're all going to go, right? If your lungs stop, producing oxygen or getting oxygen for you, eventually your brain's going to fail, right? And that's going to shut down your kidneys and your heart and your blah, blah, blah. The same goes for social institutions, right? If one social institution fails, eventually the other institutions in society will follow. For example, when the economy fails, during a Great Depression, let's say, right? Then we see, weakening of other institutions like the government or education or the family or religion. All of the institutions are interdependent. Though they are very important to us, we don't always realize until they start to fail. Right? The importance of institutions is not always known until they start to fail. Nobody appreciates the economic system until a recession hits or until the supply chain is disrupted by a global pandemic. The government's work on infrastructure, like bridges and roads, is never appreciated until it's bad, right? Until it's failing. Or a train is delayed, because of there's no funding for high-speed rails or whatever, right? We only notice them when they fail. And so this idea of when our social institutions fail is really important to social scientists trying to understand society. I don't want to go too fast, but does everyone have what they need from the slide? So what ends up happening when social institutions start to fail is that people lose confidence in those institutions, right? And this can lead to a feeling that the French call anomie. It's basically a feeling of normlessness, like a feeling like you don't know what the norms for living are anymore, and you don't know how to be a person in the world. This often happens in times when we have great social change, right? When like say during a pandemic, when everything shifts. You know, everybody kept talking about the new normal constantly, the new normal, right? They're kind of reflecting this idea that we don't actually have a good sense of what we're supposed to be doing now and how we're supposed to live our lives. And it feels weird, right? That feeling is called anomie. Because social institutions are the foundations of our society, when they begin to crumble, society does too. Take, for example, a country like Venezuela. Right? Venezuela had an economic collapse about 5 to 7 years ago. Right? I mean, it was kind of coming for a while, but their economy collapsed, which then led to a series of government overreach, corruption, inflation, starvation and famine, stealing, even things like unwanted pregnancies went up, and the rate of kids skipping school, truancy rates went up. And right, as soon as one institution failed, they all just started going, right? Another place this happened was in Pakistan, right? Part of it had to do with, war in the area, but in general, Pakistan had poor public transportation, had uncollected garbage in the streets, right? Government political corruption, poor infrastructure, right? And so everything just starts failing, right, across the board in places once an institution starts to go. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. It can be seen in other places pretty clearly. So why do institutions fail? Well, when they fail, the why comes next, sorry, but when our major institutions fail, we lose the tools we need for a smoothly functioning society. The whole purpose of a social institution is to meet our needs. If the institution goes away, our needs aren't being met. Society is not functioning, right? So, why do institutions fail? Why does this happen? Why could an economy collapse? Or why could a government fail, right? Well, they tend to fail, institutions tend to fail, when they no longer have the confidence of the public. Take, for example, the Great Depression, right, which is largely caused by a stock market crash, right, which was largely caused by people losing confidence in banking and all having runs on the bank, right? That is exactly what happened. Humans lost confidence in this financial system. Everybody tried to take their money out. It caused a market crash, right, which then led to, a decade of a depression. Why does a government fail, right? Why do governments collapse? When they no longer have the confidence of the public, right? This person's a feckless leader, or this person's an illegitimate leader, we're going to overthrow him, or whatever. But governments fail when the public does not trust them anymore. And so ultimately, social upheaval can occur when institutions lose the trust of the people. Here's the problem, right? When institutions start to fail, especially things like government, and they've lost the faith of the people, then the only way for them to stay in power is to turn to force, or the threat of force, to keep people following them, right? If you can't, earn people's trust to follow you, you can still, use an iron fist to get them to follow you, right? And so Max Weber, who is a sociologist who studied organizations and politics, he defined these two kinds of power that leaders of institutions can have. They can have legitimate power. That's power that comes from the consent of the people, right? We are giving you power over us. Take, for example, our elected politicians, right? Whether you like the particular person who's filling a role in the Senate or whatever or not, they have power over the average person because we have agreed as a society that we're going to elect people to get more power than the rest of us, right? We've all agreed to that. And so when institutions like, let's say, a democratically elected Senate, when an institution has legitimate power, the public grants them authority and willingly complies, right? Yes, we will give you the power to write laws, and then we will follow those laws. That's how it's supposed to work, right? However, power can also come from illegitimate means, right? Illegitimate power is when people exercise power or control through force or the threat of force, right? And so relying on force to control people requires great effort and resources, right? You need the money to, arm and fund the military to protect you. You need constant surveillance, a network of spies of the population to make sure nobody's dissenting. It takes a lot of time and effort, and there's no guarantee of success with illegitimate power. Though that doesn't stop people from trying. And again, this is bigger than the United States. Max Weber was a German theorist, for example. So this is a worldwide phenomenon, right? Where you can have societies where people have legitimate power, and you can have societies where people have illegitimate power. The most common form of illegitimate power that we see play out worldwide is something called authoritarianism, right? Authoritarian leader. So this word is authoritarianization, the process of people becoming authoritarian. This happens when democratically elected leaders, people with legitimate power, start amassing greater power through undemocratic means. Vladimir Putin is a great example, right? There was an election a long time ago that Vladimir Putin won democratically. People voted for him to be the leader, and he assumed the office, right? However, since then, he has shaped things to amass greater and greater power in Russia, largely through undemocratic processes, like either not holding elections or holding sham elections or whatever, right? And so that is a form of authoritarianism, right? Another example is Recep Erdogan in Turkey. The leader of Turkey has used threats of violence against the press and against people who politically challenged him, right, to ensure his power. So during the Cold War, a couple generations ago, coups were the most common form or the common way of establishing an authoritarian regime. A coup is a overthrow of the government by a military group or a paramilitary group. But so in the old days, right, the most common type of authoritarianism came from this overt, like often violent but not always, overthrow of a government from a military perspective. However, that is not the most common way of authoritarianism unfolding today. 50 years later, insurgencies and interference by foreign governments have become the more common way that authoritarian regimes have been established in countries around the world. I mentioned Venezuela before. Hugo Chavez is an example, right, of someone who took control in a country Actually, well, you know what? Originally, it was a coup, I think, that installed him. But since then, he has used, interference from China and Russia to bolster his power in that country. Anyway, does that make sense? Questions about what authoritarianism is, or how it can be, created in a society? So the key strategy that an authoritarian leader uses to keep people following them, even though they have force and they have the threat of force, the real way they keep people following them is by sowing doubts in people's minds about the democratic institutions in that society. Right? Sowing doubts in people's feelings about democratic institutions. If an authoritarian leader can convince the public that institutions are failing, they can position themselves as the answer. Right? They can position themselves as the only answer to these problems. Our government is corrupt. You should elect me because I'm the only one who's not corrupt, and I'm going to fix the corruption. Right? That's sowing doubts in our democracy and convincing the public that, oh yeah, democracy's failing, but if you elect me, I'll fix it. Right? I'm the only way that there'll be legitimacy to this institution anymore. Right? And so democracies with free elections and democratically elected leaders can slip into authoritarianism so easily. Democracies can become authoritarian governments when enough people agree that the leader needs more power in order to fix failing institutions. If we think the bridges and roads are bad enough, our infrastructural institutions are failing, and only this guy will fix it, right? We will willingly give this guy power, and that person can then, take that power and use it illegitimately. More likely, it's not about bridges and roads, right? It's usually about democracy or capitalism is a big one, right? If the past guy ruined the economy, I'm the only one who has the sense to fix the economy. Pardon me. That argument, right? The problems in society are dire, and I am the solution. Questions or comments about this? All right.
L'Oreal.
Yes, me.
I saw back in 64 a takeover of my country. It had been planned for so long, and nobody realized it. And you know why? Because they became ignorant. They did not follow the politics, what was happening in the capital. So therefore, within 24 hours or less, the president had flown secretly to the United States, Juscelino Kubitschek, and the vice president woke up in Argentina and took 25 years of oppression, because Americans have no idea what freedom is. When you cannot, if there's any suspicion, you get arrested just because you were thinking.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they control. Poverty went up. Nobody had jobs. It was awful. Well, so if you had a job, you had to work 12, 15, 16 hours a day. And, I left just as it had fallen, because the country had fallen April 21st of 1964.
Yeah.
I left Brazil June 12th of 64.
Wow.
Here.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had to leave because my mouth always been big, And I felt like, at 23 years old, I figured out if I don't leave, somebody's going to find my body behind somewhere, like it hasn't in mind that happened. But that's how it is. We need to cherish this freedom that we have. and vote right.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Mimi, do you recall like the kinds of messages that the leader, was giving? Was he trying to sow doubts in the institutions across Brazil?
He started out by asking, Brazil, we all used to have golden K24, which is the highest that you can get.
Right.
All the wedding rings, chains. He started out by, suggesting that people should give the gold back to the country. But that was coming from the military. Now, we have the military to protect us. Okay, protect the country, right? No. They were kind of, was a lot of talks that, the country needed to change because the government that we had wasn't up to par, wasn't serving the people. And people got it. The ones that read a lot, they got out of the country before it started.
Yeah, they saw it coming.
A lot of people end up in Miami. People with money end up in Miami at that time. They end up in Argentina. They moved to Argentina. But because it's a slow progress, it's a slow process. You know what I mean? When it comes overnight, they had worked on it for years.
Right.
And it's amazing. It's amazing what brainwashing does. Because it's all about brainwash. And
convincing the public of a certain message, right?
Yes. And they have those little pockets of people that believed in socialism, which was more, so they have the Marxist society.
Right.
As some other societies. And people start joining. And all that they did say was, you have a good education, don't have to pay for it. You have health care that you don't have to pay for. You have this, you have that. Your children will be able to go to school. Really? School is a labor camp? And that was it. I had cousins that killed themselves because they just couldn't take it. And the public is gullible.
They are. We want our leaders to tell us what to do as a whole, whether we don't or not. Yes.
And you know what? The sad part of it, that most people was due to their ignorance.
Yeah. Yep.
They did not come clear with it, did not understand it. If you are promised good education to your children, university, this and that, for free, okay, this is my guy.
Yeah, but how are we going to pay for it? Yeah.
Yeah, but nobody questioned that.
Right.
And ones that had any inkling of questioning, they had to leave, and leave soon. And we did, Yeah. So that's my take.
So that's a perfect segue, because the idea is, people had lost interest in politics. They've lost interest in, they weren't keeping an eye on their government, right? They weren't keeping themselves informed. And as a result, they lost faith in their institutions, right? And that allowed someone to come in and undermine them and, take power. So what I want to point out is that that's also going on in the United States and has been for some time. Over the last 40 years in the U.S., since the 1970s, the American public has lost faith in most of their social institutions. And I have some evidence to back that up. I just want to let people write down what they need, but lost faith in the institutions. So I know you can't see this very clearly. It's in the book. But these are 6 different social institutions, right? The presidency, the Supreme Court, Congress, the military, the police, and the criminal justice system. And it's a little hard to see, but on the side, right, all of these have lost faith over time. Most of them, the only ones that have gone up are the military and the police. And actually that was done in 2016. I'd argue probably over the last 5 years that's changed. So in general, the military and the criminal justice system are the only 2 institutions in our society that have shown statistically significant increases in public confidence. On the other hand, confidence is lost. Sorry?
We have questioned the police ability to police us. The police district. So we have one branch that if that branch decided, we are here, let's see, let's channel this to our favor.
Yeah.
And first thing that I noticed when we had a former president and he went to have a military parade, that's a huge
It's a red
sign.
flag.
Yeah, huge. Bigger than the China red flag.
Right.
No? Yeah.
Well, and so, and to be fair, right, regardless of who the president is, Democrat or Republican or whatever, people report being distrustful of anyone in that role, right? And have, again, since the 70s, decreasing, maybe we can blame Nixon, I'm just kidding. But either way, right, like, people are less confident in the role of the presidency, in the Supreme Court, in Congress, in the media, and in democracy as a whole. In fact, we'll come back to that one in a few minutes. Like, younger generations in our society don't see the need for democracy as we once envisioned it. It's kind of an interesting poll, but again, I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, the idea is overall, right, people are less trustful of our social institutions, and it's been going down over time, and we know that losing faith in one can lead to losing faith in the others, and that's a vacuum that allows authoritarianism to come in. But our institutions, like the government, are only one facet of social life. There's also been an a decreasing faith, an increasing decline in faith, a decreasing faith in the media. The media is sometimes called the fourth estate, right? Kind of implying that it is an arm of the public that is as important to government as elected leadership, right? Because democracies rely on an informed electorate. The point of democracy and everyone having a voice should be, in theory, right, that everyone is informed about all the issues and that they are choosing what they truly think is the best path forward. Now, in reality, not everybody is an informed voter. Not everybody votes with their conscience. Not everyone includes that in their decision making. But the idea of democracy is all the voices together should be informed as a whole. And so we need an institution like the media that can provide trustworthy, reliable sources of information to the voters. Or at least that's what we hope they will do, right? People who understand how government works and who keep up with current events are more informed voters than people who don't, right? And so we need to have somebody explaining the process, explaining the issues to the society. The problem is, pretty much since the advent of 24-hour cable news channels, as well as the internet, and again, they both started roughly in the same decade, like the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, the internet took off much later, but 24-hour cable news channels and the internet often blend reliable, trustworthy sources of information with opinion shows and other kinds of material, because they got to fill the time. And most of those opinion shows often promote a particular political perspective. I'm sure you've all seen somewhere in social media, that chart of all the different news organizations and like whether they're center or right or left or, fact checking or non-fact checking. But the point is, right, there's so much information out there now. It used to be if you wanted reliable information, you knew you could turn on, Walter Cronkite at 6 p.m. and get unbiased, factual information. Whether that was true or not doesn't matter. That's what people thought, right? And so now, almost nobody believes you can just turn on the TV and believe what you hear at face value, right? In fact, and this is also in the book, so if it's hard to see on the screen, it's figure 15.2. This is the percent of U.S. adults who trust the information they get from X, Y, or Z location, right? So the first one was national news organizations. And as you can see, all three groups, yes, Democrats apparently, trust national news more than Republicans, but for all three of them, it's low. It's a quarter or less percent of the time that they trust them, and it's gone down a little bit. Local news organizations, friends, family, and acquaintances, and social media sites. Social media sites have single digits and we know the information is not trustworthy, yet we continually consume and share that information. You know it, you've done it. I'm admitting it. I see things, I'm like, that's probably not true. Share, right? Because it's going to get clicks or whatever. We know it's bad, but we still continue sharing it and updating it, right? So I mentioned, the charts that you might see on the internet, something like this. Has anyone seen something like this before? It might not be this exact one, but this chart is bad. It's really, really bad, methodologically speaking. First of all, all of them are based on usually about a dozen articles or clips to represent the entire site, right? And, you could pick, even the Fox News, which is pretty well known to be right-wing, right? They might have 12 stories that have a neutral or democratic lean to them. If you happen to pick those, they could end up over here, right? You got to have more data to really base your assumptions. But bigger than that, this idea of liberal and conservative, right, and right-wing and left-wing is American-specific, right? In any other country, like in Europe, for example, most of the things that we consider left-wing would be center or center-right. And basically, the truth is that nearly every liberal site on here does not challenge capitalism, does not challenge corporate, profit, does not challenge, our status quo in any way. They don't support, often trans rights and other kinds of, more left-leaning causes, right? This whole thing is a shift shift to the right. And so it's kind of disingenuous to say, oh, these are middle of the road media entities, right? When really they are right-wing, arguably. So now that being said, there are still terrible ones that don't use any evidence and back it up, right, all across the bottom here. And there are media sites that fact check and use reliable sources and that kind of thing, right? I question how this political spectrum is laid out. Long story short, though, you can see there's a lot of media out there in the world that is not is partisan. There's a lot that is partisan, and there's a lot that is not very rigorous, right? You want things to be up here. And so media has a problem in our society. And people are starting to notice, right, or slowly. In fact, if the purpose of the media originally was to inform the electorate, right, then you should expect that their information about elections, let's say, would be reliable. Right? Yes, it might be skewed to whatever political, group that they're targeting. But in 2016, during the 2016 election cycle, I haven't seen a report or a similar study for the 2020 election cycle yet, but the media failed in the two main functions of the media, right? The first function of the media is to provide awareness to citizens on issues. Well, it turns out that the media was statistically significantly more likely to publish information about scandals or personal information about the candidates than they were to publish information about the policy positions of either candidate, right? And this was 2016, remember, so it was Clinton, Trump was the particular, election matchup. But, and if you think back, right, how much more did you hear about Benghazi or Trump saying, grab them by the whatever on that bus, right, than you did about what their policy positions are and what kinds of laws they would enact and that kind of thing, right? Failure of the media to ask the real questions and to present the real information. Even when they did cover candidates' policy positions, it was minuscule. A study of the New York Times found that for the 150 front page stories that were published during the election cycle, right, for 150 days around this election, only 5 of them compared the candidates' policy positions. 5 articles from the New York Times, arguably one of the biggest papers, right? And from the home state of both candidates, right? At the time. And so 5 out of 150 front page stories actually compared policy positions. So not only is the media we get skewed and inaccurate and often biased, but even when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're barely doing it, right? So a decline in the faith in the media over the last 20 or 30 years is a reasonable response from the population. Questions or comments about any of this?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Trump. He's partially responsible. When the guys like him and Murrow went to Congress and petitioned for an hour every night for local and national news, they all forgot one part. During that hour, there should be no advertising. They forgot to put that in there, and that's why we're in the mess.
And so now everything is advertiser-driven rather than truth-driven, right? So
now they said that one sentence.
Yeah, I feel like it shouldn't have had to follow them, but I hear you, yep. And they probably had a sense at the time that was going to matter, but yeah.
Lorian.
Yes.
Talking about losing confidence in the media. Today, as I wrote to come to class, I had my radio on PBM, the public broadcasting, the one that I have trust.
Yep.
And they were talking about, was piece of the news about the Merck and Pfizer combined to see if they can make that the pill for the COVID, okay?
Yep.
Last word. It's been produced too fast. That's going to make the public, say, I don't want to take this because that's what happened the last time.
Right.
And another thing, I was horrified for a person running for presidency. Back in 2016, remember Johnson?
Yes.
His last name was Johnson?
Gary Johnson, yes.
Oh, yes. The reporter asking him, what do you think of Aleppo? You know what he said? What's Aleppo? I was like, what? Aleppo been in the news. In Greece, that people is congregating there.
Right.
Trying to leave Syria.
And Syria,
this guy,
Aleppo is the capital of Syria.
Did not know. How can I trust the next guy?
Right.
If you was that ignorant. But that's, I just want to bring in this story, why we don't trust the media. Because this is such an awareness in the public that, this was done too fast.
Right. And by saying that, they undermine people's trust.
Yeah, and puts doubt in the public's mind. Thank you.
Yes, of course. And you're right. So here's one institution, the media, undermining another institution, medicine, right, and healthcare. Once one institution falters, they can cannibalize each other. They can take each other down with them, right? So yes. Last thing about the media is, of course, social media, right, which is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, I know it's been around for 20-something years, but like in the scheme of the media, right, it's a newer part of the media. And we all know that social media can be an echo chamber where people only hear voices that they want to hear. But research shows actually that social media does have a potential to lead people to multiple news sources. So you can certainly mute those other sources in things like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. You can unfollow or not follow things you don't want to. But in general, social media does expose people to more perspectives than if they just sat at home. Well, they're still sitting at home, but if they weren't on social media. People, by going on social media, you are more likely to hear a perspective that you don't already agree with. However, as we know, we don't like this, right? And so the minute we're confronted with something that we don't like to hear or that we don't agree with social media, we can turn it off, right? And stop hearing that multiple source, that new source. And that is where we get that echo chamber idea where, and I admit it, I go on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and the things I see are the same things over and over again. This cute cow that I follow out in the country, or the same 10 pages or whatever, right? And hearing perspectives that you don't always agree with is good exercise, but in countries that have weak institutions, this can lead to violent results, right? And Mimi, you mentioned, we see this with the pandemic right now, and people not being sure about the science around masking or around vaccinations or around the new treatments or old treatments that aren't good or whatever. Online rumors can lead to panic, and people can take matters into their own hands in a bad way. One example of this was Pizzagate. I don't know if you guys remember that one from 2017, 2019, where there was an online rumor that there was a sex trafficking ring in the basement of the Comet Pizza joint in Washington, D.C., and somebody with a gun went into this pizza joint and held everyone at gunpoint. Did they shoot? They did shoot, right?
They did shoot.
Yeah. Because they thought there were children being held captive in the basement of a building that does not have a basement, because it was a made rumor.
Wasn't Hillary?
Yeah, and Hillary was behind it, right.
Wasn't she that had organized this whole thing,
Yeah, that was the rumor, right?
I think that's part of the problem when you're talking about echo chambers.
Yeah.
Is we have a society where it turns out that sometimes the dumbest people are the loudest.
Correct, and we don't always distinguish between loudest and most correct.
Exactly.
Yes. And if we've got very few reliable sources of information, right, and people don't feel protected by their government or their police or their institutions, right, of course they're going to panic when they're faced with something scary, like a pandemic or sex trafficking ring or whatever, right? And so the websites, social media in particular, and Facebook has admitted this in court, right? They are programmed to promote whatever gets the most attention, not whatever is the most accurate, right? Whatever's the loudest, not the rightest. And that's the problem, right? That's the issue. It can lead to violence in the real world, right? Not virtually. So, other questions or comments about the media and their hand in all of this?
That's why you often enough hear the young people saying, I don't trust the media, I don't trust the government, which create a huge embargo for young people to take the vaccine.
Yeah.
They did not want to take the vaccine. And more you talk to younger people, they are more tending to socialism. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did, and in fact, I have some data on that coming up in just a second. Yep.
Yeah. And that's like, what happened to us? What happened to our society? That we became so doubtful, so frightened, that we lost our voices. People never will realize why in the 60s the young people took over the country on the streets. They needed answers from the government. The government wasn't giving them answers. The government wasn't talking about the education. The government wasn't talking about the society that they should live in and jobs. It's so what they did. They organized. You know what I mean? And they were the scum of the earth. They weren't. We achieved some social changes to them.
Right.
And we don't have that breed of people anymore.
Yeah, I think so. Part of the problem too is in the past, the government may have been doing the same kinds of stuff they're doing now, but we didn't realize it, right? The public wasn't told or shown about it as much.
And nobody questions.
Yeah, and so they weren't as cynical, right? But after 2 generations or so, right, of time of asking questions, of seeing the same things continue to happen, despite all of that organizing and things from the past, right? To see the same problems still happening, people lose faith. And so
another thing that's we losing. Companies no longer wants to have unions. They never want to, but people push for it because that compromise compromise their status for what they have, what they offer. I don't have a union. I don't have to offer health care. That was sort of protection to the employees. And now the employers want to be protected from that.
Right.
And did you just have a case that went to Supreme Court and they turned down that the company did not have to have a union, they would let them, something like that. I was reading that some time ago.
It might have been the Amazon, the vote to
also Uber.
Or Uber, okay.
Uber, Amazon.
When the gig economy drivers wanted to unionize, right?
Yes,
right.
Yes. And so that means the big guy have all the protection, the little guy doesn't.
Right.
And people is not realizing what's happening. Why people is not working, don't want to work. They are standing up and saying, I put a lot of hours here to get $7.50 an hour.
Right.
I'm done. I'm going to get something to do for myself. And I will survive and that's what's happening. Brunswick just recently, before school started, you know how much they used to pay a cross guide, right? $12 an hour. Brunswick was offering $30 an hour and no candidates was showing up.
Wow.
Finally, I think they went up to $32 an hour, and then they had a few people that applied.
Yeah.
But that's what, the poor, what they call ourselves the lower class. We're speaking up now. We're
working class, yeah, yep.
Yes, the working class. We're pushing back. We're not gonna enslave ourselves for a meager money. Because gets me is that we have to shut down. Oh, give me a break. How are you gonna shut down? Just because you don't want to pay? You deserve to shut down. How come nobody shut down because they gave a raise?
Right.
They make enough money.
Right.
Look at Walmart. Walmart put people on the state health care when they have so much money. And they pay their leaders so they can get food stamps. Now, food stamps...
But the owners make bonuses and things, yeah. Yep.
Yes, and they all make millions. Well, it's time for people to speak up. I'm all for it.
I hear you, Mimi, I do. And I don't have a slide on losing faith in capitalism because our society is very careful to not let anyone ever lose faith in capitalism if they can help it.
Gen Alpha's kind of causing a lot of chaos right now.
Oh no, it's starting. It is starting.
Absolutely here for
yes, speak the rich, please. Yes. and I think Mimi's right. There is, growing unrest, right, among the working class.
The Alphas are going crazy.
So yeah, the just starting to work generation, right? So yeah, capitalism is one of our institutions. It's one of the most closely guarded institutions in our culture. Ironically, the one that isn't as closely guarded, though we think that it should be the strongest, is democracy. And it turns out that there is a growing cynicism, again, among younger generations more than older ones. But that's because older generations have lived with it longer and so they like it more. But anyway, there's growing cynicism towards not only political leaders, but democracy itself. Just for the record, democracy is a form of government in which leaders are elected by the people. There's lots of different kinds of democracy. I know there'll be some pedantry out there where somebody's like, well, we are a constitutional republic because we elect leaders to then, or representatives to then elect our leaders, right? Which is true, but we are still a form of democracy, right? The people elect through a representative form, right? The point is that support for the idea of democracy, the actual idea of democracy, support of democracy to run the country drops by age. So people were asked the question, how essential is it to live in a democracy? How essential is it to live in a democracy? What we are seeing down here is the decade that you were born in, right? And what your answer is to the question, how essential is it? This is the percent of people who answered it is essential or it is very essential, right? The top two categories. And so in Europe, the older generations, still thought it was essential, but now the younger generations say it's less essential. It's not essential to live in a democracy. And look at the United States, right? People born in the 30s and 40s, so the greatest generation, right? Then we have like baby boomers in here, and then Gen X, and then millennials, and then I guess it kind of ends with the beginning of the millennial generation. But as you can see, right, back in the day, or people who were born, in the 30s and 40s, 75% absolutely essential to live in a democracy, right? Compared to 30% of the millennial generation, seeing it to be, essential. Another question was asked, is democracy a bad way to run a country? And here you have to compare the two green lines, like the two green lines are from the 90s, and then the two blue lines are from the early 2010s. So they over time. So in the 90s, right, about 15 to 17% of people said democracy is a bad way to run the country. But by, at least in, among young people, but by 2011, that had, almost doubled to 25% of young people. I'll give you a second to look at that again, but what we are seeing in Europe and the US, but more so in the US, is that there is a declining faith in democracy. Support for the idea that democracy is bad or flawed way to run the country increases as the respondent gets, is younger, from a younger generation. Questions or comments on this?
Of course. One of the things that I noticed too is in the polls, the young people is reluctant to vote. And what for? My vote is a waste. And I have to push my grandkids and my kids, you need to go vote. My son, I don't, but my son is like me, very proactive in things. But it's no longer a pride to go vote.
Right. If you don't think democracy matters or is a good way to do things, why would you want to participate in it?
Exactly. And all that I hear is, well, I don't trust the government. Why am I going to vote if my vote doesn't count? One thing that I always say, as long as you vote, you have a voice. And I did that with one of my kids. She came into a barrier with health care for her husband. And she says, I don't know, we can pay for this bill. I said, you know what? Did you vote? No,
right.
But I vote. I voted. I called Jerry Gold. Within 24 hours, she had health care for her husband.
Yeah.
But you see, then she learned. The past election says, I gotta go vote, because I learned something. This kid of mine is 48 years old. How quick she lost her faith in democracy.
Yeah. The one way you can guarantee that things won't change is by not voting, right? Is by not exercising your vote.
But you know what? My vote is my mouth.
Yes. But yes.
Some time ago, the Democrat Party sent me a letter asking me if I wanted to run for selectman.
In Brunswick?
Yes. That's not the first time I've been asked to run for mayor, this and that. I said to them, my mouth is too loud, and that I don't take a no for an answer. So they didn't say anything, but a few people said, you really should, we need somebody like you here. But because I have school, I have lots of things that I do for other people. I work with the new immigrants in Maine because I speak French and Portuguese.
Yeah.
I work with people with disability. I want to be a voice, but a voice on my terms.
That's good.
Because I need to go to some more meetings at the city hall. That's something that I like to know because I need to know what's going on in my town. How come those bills pass without you guys seeing it? You went there.
Right.
Then you complain. I didn't know this sewer was going to come here. Did you go to the city hall to a meeting? No. So, I like to be very active in that position that I have now. I'm 8 years old. Nobody's going to shoot me.
Here's hoping, Mimi. Here's hoping. Why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, I want to talk about what solutions there are for our social institutions. That there can be some, and I want to give you an example of a social movement, and then we'll wrap up for the course, actually, the whole thing. So let's meet back here at about 2:15. Okay, 2:15. See you all. So, like I said at the second half of class today, we're going to talk about some solutions. We're not going to have it all be bad and doom and gloom. And then we will wrap up by talking about a social movement. And I'll give you some extra credit, opportunity for the participation assignment today. So, whoops, that's the wrong slide anyway. We can go back to the computer. So one last slide to finish up what we were talking about before the break, about how our social institutions have been weakened because people have lost faith in them, right? And not to mention general social problems like crime or something else can weaken institutions too. People don't just lose faith in them for no reason. And so one social problem can create or exacerbate other social problems that already exist. For example, you can have a depression, like an economic depression, right, happen, and that, of course, can lead to other problems like, job loss or homelessness or food scarcity or whatever, right? One problem can lead to others directly. So that would be an example of a direct situation where a problem like a depression affects social institutions like the economy or agriculture. And other times, social problems can lead to general social unrest that also can affect our institutions, right? Like social inequality. The rich and the poor or racial inequality, right, can often lead to, as a social problem, and it can lead to social unrest, as we saw, for example, last summer, where people's frustration with this social problem creates, in and of itself, another problem, social unrest, right? And basically, social institutions end up failing, as I mentioned at the beginning, when they no longer have public confidence. When people stop trusting the institutions in society, when they stop contributing to the institutions in society, when they stop caring about the institutions in society, those institutions will fail. And then, of course, cause bigger issues. So what do we do? Well, the good news is that it might feel like all is lost, but social change can occur and has occurred during even the most dire of circumstances. I had a student one semester in this class who, he only showed up about a third of the time. Anyway, this was back when it was like a standard live class. And he lived on a commune in Maine with like 12 other people. He was very much, what you might call a hippie, doctor, but he said when he took this class, and we got to this point, he was like, why can't we just burn it all down and start over from scratch? Like, it feels like it's too far gone, right? And I have to say, I can relate to that impulse, not burning things, that's not the impulse, but the impulse of like, everything's a mess. Like, we need to erase it and start from scratch, right? But we don't have to. There are ways to save our social institutions that are not quite so radical. Because of the fact that we, as social people and members of society, we created these problems, which means necessarily we can solve them. Not we, like you, just you, and just you, and just you, but we in the collective. Society, as a whole, can provide solutions for problems that society as a whole has caused. So one of these issues that we need to overcome is something called the tragedy of the commons, which is a philosophical argument that says that society is hurt. Society loses out when the members of society focus only on individual gain. Right? When individuals act in their own best interest only, and deplete a resource, right? That resource can no longer be used in the future by anyone, right? And so, yeah, it works in the short term for somebody to, hoard toilet paper at the beginning of a pandemic or whatever, right? But in the long term, everybody suffers, right? Because now there's, or was a toilet paper shortage for everyone. The idea that the fact that we have social institutions is meant to be a check on individuals just having a free-for-all, right? Institutions' job is to ensure that individuals cannot act only in their own short-term interests, right? So we have institutions in society that are meant to control us. They are meant to control our behavior. Yes, that makes us sound like sheep, right? But are we sheep because we all drive on the right-hand side of the road because we don't want to get in a head-on collision by driving on the left? Is that a tyrannical rule? No, it's a rule that someone put in place to ensure that we can all use the road safely, right? It's not government overreach to say, please drive on the right-hand side of the road, everybody, or we will ticket you or arrest you if you don't, right? By having rules that say, you can't only look out for yourself, but you need to look out for others, like, say, a public health crisis, right? Those are not tyranny. They are institutions ensuring that people don't burn everything down by only acting in their own self-interest. And this is something that sociology has pointed out, in particular as a social science, through the concept of the sociological imagination. We talked about that on the very first day of class with the pictures from Haiti, right? Where the pictures from Haiti after the earthquake were individual stories, right? But they were part of a larger, bigger picture of what happened to Haiti from this earthquake and all that kind of stuff. Being able to relate an individual's experiences to larger social patterns is the point of sociology. And so being able to identify when individual behaviors are causing negative social patterns in society can help us to solve those problems. So take, for example, the fact that there's been a decrease in faith or trust in government, right? That's something we talked about in the first half. So one of the ways government can regain citizens' trust is by encouraging them to invest in the well-being of their entire communities, right? People who are invested in their community. So even if you maybe don't trust, the people in Washington, D.C., right? You can trust Mimi in Brunswick as Brunswick's newest mayor. That's what I heard. She's going to be mayor. But if you're involved in your community, right, you can make changes. And that can restore people's faith in government. Even if it doesn't restore people's faith in federal government, it can start, right? So, for example, a community that provides available and easy to access information to all of its citizens. In Boston, I think it was 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, they started an app, a smartphone app in Boston for the city of Boston, that you can report any infrastructure, anything managed by the city that's damaged, like a street light or a pothole or a curb is broken or whatever. Excuse me. And once the city made the repair, they take a picture of the repair and send it to the person who reported it, to show them, hey, you raised a problem and now here is this problem solved. Right? And it's a simple thing, but what the officials found was that when the citizens knew the city was listening and responding to their reports, they were more likely to report future problems. They started trusting that somebody was doing something. Is fixing a pothole going to save democracy? Probably not overnight. But it's, by providing easy to access information or feedback, it allowed people to gain trust, right? allowing the public to be involved in policy creation. Again, this is something where in our federal government, the whole system is like, oh, we elect representatives that go and deal with it for us, so we don't have to. But in reality, the laws and rules that are most likely to affect you every day, those are happening in your city and state. They're not happening in Washington, right? And so by people becoming more involved in policy creations, especially in the local level, they gain trust in the system. The government can put services online. The more services, this, of course, the pandemic helped with this, right? Because a lot of services that couldn't be done, a lot of services that originally had to be done in person could now be done online. And that, when it's easy to accomplish what you need to do, like paying your taxes or renewing your driver's license or whatever, you're more likely to comply with that government rule, right? If it's hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can't even go into the place. Like the Social Security office is still and
Fair.
yeah. So
I don't mean to say that everything's fixed. Yes, I hear you.
I'm trying to fix something, but now they're like, oh, just do it online.
Right.
It would be easier.
I needed to renew my license, but because we're also doing the Real ID thing, you have to do that one in person. And so, I couldn't renew my license online if I wanted the Real ID. So it is, of course, it is not solved. But the bigger point of if people can do things quickly and easily, they're more likely to do them. That's true. This may not be the perfect answer. Fair.
We are still talking about the government.
Correct. Correct. And even in the 50s and 60s, when there was a lot of faith in the government, people still also didn't actually trust them all that much. You know what I mean? So I get it. Yeah.
Off topic. Are you from Boston or the Massachusetts area?
I am not.
Okay.
Do I have the accent?
You don't until you said the word Boston.
Ah, Boston.
You went full selfie for just.
No, I am from upstate New York. If anything, I have a little bit of a New York accent.
We're upstate.
Saratoga?
I thought you were from Taunton or Fall River.
I'm from everywhere, guys.
So am I.
I've got and I can do my Western New York accent, which is kind of like the Midwestern accent.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah.
Wyoming County.
I went to Geneseo, so.
I was born in Warsaw, so.
I do know Warsaw.
Very nearby.
Small world. Anyway, last one for this story is, nope, there's two more. Open, easy to understand processes and policies. If people believe, and if the government is transparent about what they're doing and why they're doing it, people will trust them more. And public, not private campaign contributions. One of the biggest reasons people don't trust elections and politics is because of the money involved in those things. If elected officials were only beholden to the citizens who, supported them, right, they would be able to focus on the needs of their voters rather than their need to raise money. So transparency and transparency in funding would be, these are all steps that could improve people's trust in government, right? No idea what it means. I like roads and bridges, but if I had read question 3 or whatever it was at this past election, I don't know that I would have known that that's what that was doing.
Exactly.
Or the double negatives too. No on the band, the wording of things is always a nightmare as well.
Yes meant no and no meant yes.
Correct. That's a great lesson to teach every generation. So yes, right. Doing things clearly and effectively, also not a hallmark of government, but if it were, there'd be fewer jokes about government, people would trust it more, right? I mean, I'm not saying these things are easy to achieve, but there are ways to improve things. Another institution that has lost a lot of faith, we said, was the media, right? Just kidding, I'm sorry, for the government. When people have higher trust in the government, it benefits everyone in society, even those who don't trust the government, right? By trusting the government, it can benefit everyone. So take, for example, vaccines, right? Vaccinations, and I don't just mean for COVID, I mean, if you want to just talk about measles today or polio, but by people trusting the government and receiving those vaccinations, it benefited everyone in society such that those diseases were either eradicated or significantly pushed back, right? And so when people have trust in the government, and that vaccinations are just one example, but the more people trust it, the more everyone benefits. And finally, members of a democratic society can make the government take some of those steps from the last slide by doing exactly what Mimi described earlier, which was organizing effectively. She was talking about like in the 1960s and 70s, right? Especially the young generation at the time, the college students and young adults of those eras were very good at organizing effectively, right? Protests and marches and making their voices heard. The other way to make the government do what you want it to do is by exercising your right to vote, which we also talked about before the break. Politicians pay attention to people who they think that they will support. Politicians pay attention to people they think will support them, usually support them through money, or through organizational power, or through voting. And so if you don't have much money, you can gain power by organizing and voting together, right? Questions or comments about restoring trust in government? Okay. Now is media. I had one more slide before, I forgot. So another institution that we have lost trust in is the media. And so how do we restore trust in the media? How do we restore trust in the fact that there is factual information out there in the world? It's just not on social media. Well, there are organizations that are working to gain citizen faith in the media. So, some of them include the Trust Project, the News Integrity Initiative, the Trust in News Initiative, NewsGuard, and the Journalism Trust Initiative. I had to look them all up. I had not heard of them before, but they're organizations that try to make it easier for people to identify the difference between an opinion piece and a news piece, how to make the news more transparent to people, like why people report what they're reporting, creating computer programs that can recognize, false information in like social media articles or whatever. They are some of the institutions that are behind those rankings or media bias charts, even if they're flawed. So there are social organizations that are trying to restore people's trust in the media. But we also need that to come from more than just one voice. And if the voice is from the media, members of the media, then we can only take that so far. We need other institutions to support the media, including political leaders that can reassure the public that reliable news sources do exist, perhaps pointing out what they are, but even just telling them that they exist can be powerful information. Because attacks on the media, especially just general attacks, like as though all the media is the same, can endanger journalists, can diminish trust in the media, and can diminish the existence of facts. There are facts, there are stories to which there are not two sides. Those things can happen. But by by having a blanket attack on the media and by undermining that institution in society, it diminishes all of these things. Does that mean that all media is great and we should embrace it without question? Of course not. But just blindly attacking the media for being the media isn't going to solve any of the problems. Questions or comments about restoring trust in the media?
Is that a hope for this trust to be restored?
Do I think it could happen?
Yes. I listened to something very interesting this morning. Chris Cuomo. I don't know if you heard.
We're just talking about that, yeah.
He's been suspended now because he defended his brother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was one of the guys that I trusted.
Right. But then he violated his ethics, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And here we go. I mean, I look up to the Cuomos. This man is, you know, not a pedophile, but I don't know, a sex predator. You know, the governor. You know what I mean? And the lies that he came up with.
Yeah.
Bow down, get up. And say, look, I was wrong and I gotta go.
Right. But then to find out the media in the form of his brother was helping to protect him.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that the governor took advantage that his brother was so well-liked and so honest in the things that he did. So, you know, and hey, I think that...
I'm a New Yorker, I hear you. I'm familiar with the Cuomo family intimately.
You know, and I think that Chris should have kind of distanced himself. I cannot comment on this. It's been investigated.
Yeah, but the minute he went into that basement, you know, during the quarantine.
He did. And he ran into the basement very, 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 very quickly.
Yeah.
You know, do you remember the congressman from, I think he was from Minnesota, when the scandal came, he immediately didn't even give press conference, he resigned.
Oh yeah, Al Franken. Yeah.
Yes. You know, and that's it. No, do that. Get out. Don't involve anybody else. Then you face your charges privately. Don't let the media come in and give all those ideas to us.
And so if they started holding people accountable publicly,
exactly.
Right, people would trust them more.
Yeah. What do you think that the Media Man March was about?
Right.
The Media Man March was that Black March.
Right.
Back in the 90s.
Right.
Okay? That a million men showed up in Washington, D.C. at the mall.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what I heard. No, I don't know.
It was like 100,000, but yeah. Many
But
people.
it was a lot of people. It was a lot of people from Washington, D.C. They were seeking answers from the government. You know, we hold you accountable. Are you going to give us answers for what's going on? And guess what? Nothing happened. The government didn't answer, nothing was changed. The only thing that did change now a little bit is those last convictions.
Yep. Some clemency and
convictions. Yeah. You know, and we missed one. You know, he should have been at least put on probation.
Right.
17 years old holding a firearm that he shouldn't have in his hand.
Right. So I agree with you. The media has done a poor job of representing certain kinds of crime, but also holding itself accountable, right?
They don't hold themselves accountable. How am I going to trust in what I'm listening?
Right. And that's, in order for them to restore the trust, they need to start doing more like Chris, you know, getting rid of people who violate the public's trust.
Exactly. Right. Do you know what I loved about it was when Matt Lowry, the first thing, boom, they nip on the back.
Yep.
They didn't want him to be associated with them. Was another, what was his name? Charles, somebody from PBM.
I don't remember.
Charles.
Yeah, it was on there forever.
On PBS?
It's not Carroll.
Yes.
Charles Downey, no, Charles. Curls? Oh, he's his throat.
Charlie Rose.
Charlie Rose. We got there.
The thing died there. The thing died there. You know, they held him accountable. They don't work for us anymore.
Right.
That is it. We need to do that more often.
I agree. And I would add that, you know, frankly, to the slide, like one thing the media can do to regain trust is to start publicly holding itself accountable, right?
Exactly.
Jen Psaki's doing a pretty good job.
Yes, the current White House spokesperson, right? Yeah.
She's just laying smackdowns on people. It's kind of awesome to watch.
Yeah, when they say she's being false or, well, here's the evidence that I am using to make this claim. And
just like how tactfully you can tell someone that you're an idiot. Asking that question and be tactful about it, that's impressive.
But yes, making it clear that people who violate the standards of the media will no longer be involved in the media. If that were the real message, if that's really what was happening, I think people would trust it a bit more than they do. So yes, I agree.
Yes, you know, and we need to hold them accountable. And if we, the public, we the people, don't speak up, they're not going to be held accountable.
Yeah, no,
And
we'd rather complain about it and make memes.
You see, you know what? I'm a firm believer. Write to the media. Tell them your thoughts, but let them know. Go to that place and look, that's what this is. And I want to hear it. Mm-hmm. I want to hear an answer. You know, and today I think that we are so disillusioned that the young people don't want an upheaval. They don't want to question.
Yeah.
Or at least don't.
Or their voices get drowned out. Like, you know, you can go on Twitter and CNN and be like, why did you say this? That's false. But they're not going to respond to you, right? So, yeah.
No. And they find faults. Yeah. You cannot say a word that it sounds wrong to somebody else on social media. They come at you like crazy. You know, I get off of Facebook. I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
It's too much of people's lives out there that I'm not really interested.
There's a lot of oversharing, that is true. So let me wrap this up for everyone then, in the form of our back to social institutions, right? The field of sociology and this course in particular, but it gives us a lot of the tools that we need to fix some of these problems. So I already mentioned the concept of the sociological imagination, by connecting the individual level to the broader social patterns. Well, think of it this way, right? Individual survival in society depends on the survival of our institutions in society. None of us were raised with survival tactics in the wild. You know, maybe some of us with military training could last a little longer, but we all know that if there were an apocalypse, right, our strength comes from the fact that we are communities, right, that we protect each other. And so individual survival depends on the survival of institutions. The good news is, as people, as individual members of society, we can all be agents of change. The last thing I'm going to talk about on the next slide is the idea of a social movement and how individuals can play a role in bringing about social change. It's also important to remember social institutions are evolutionary in nature. They evolve over time, and they're supposed to, right? You know, the form of government we had in 1789 is not identical to the one we have in 2021, right? Yeah, it's based on the same Constitution, right? Although there's been several amendments to it since 1789, but it's evolved, right? And what American-style democracy looks like has evolved. The media is very different from when it first evolved, right? You know, obviously the internet has been a huge part of that, but even, you know, being able to have daily newspaper, right, rather than a weekly one or one from, you know, just a country. Things like education has evolved over time. And so just because institutions aren't the way we remember them doesn't necessarily mean that's good or bad. It just means that they're different. So keeping that in mind is important. They go through cycles, they go through, you know, spells. So how does this relate to social movements? A social movement is defined as conscious, collective, and organized attempts to bring about or resist large-scale change in the social order. Give you a minute to write all that down. Conscious, collective, and organized attempts. It's on purpose, it's not one person, and it's organized. Attempts to either bring about change or to stop change from happening. It depends, you know, what it is, but to make change in the social order. So one example I want to give you comes from Canada. However, it directly affects the U.S. because there are versions of this happening in the U.S. as well. So I want to talk about a tribal group, a First Nations group in Canada and British Columbia called the Unistoten. The Unistoten are actively, and have for the last 5 years, I think, more than that, but anyway, have been actively protesting a oil pipeline that wants to go through their territory, right, in British Columbia. So just for some background, this is British Columbia. Alaska is here. Alberta, Canada is here, right? Washington would be way down there. Vancouver's down that way. And this green line is the route that's planned, was planned for this pipeline, right? And the Unistotens, territory and the camp that we're going to see in a minute are located here. So right on the pipeline, right? I'm going to show you a video that kind of sets up the issue, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about social movements, and then I'll show you a follow-up. The first video I'm going to show you is from 2015, so that's why I said 5 years, and I was like, oh, a little longer, 6 or 7 now. In 2015, in response to multiple pipeline protests around not just Canada, but there was the Standing Rock in the U.S. and others. But in Canada, they passed a law called C-51, which was a law that classified anyone who interferes with infrastructure as a terrorist, right? So this law turned what used to be like a nuisance, kind of thing. You get a ticket or like asked to move around, right? But because pipelines are so financially important to Canada's infrastructure, they now classify, protesting a pipeline as terrorism. So I'm going to show you a documentary that was made at the Unistoten camp back in 2015 about this, this issue being set up. So here we go. It jumps right in. There's no introduction, and the woman we're going to see first, her name is Frida, and she's the spokesperson for the camp, for the Unistoten in the area. So she's encountering a roadblock trying to enter the territory.
Check driver's license.
What's the purpose of this blockade?
Sorry?
What's the purpose of this blockade?
This blockade?
It's a block here, stopping people.
We're just checking driver's licenses and insurance.
I know you've been doing that for...
We've been out here for a couple of weeks now, 2 weeks. Actually, we've only been out for 1 week previous. Sorry, I'm just checking your driver's license, man. What's the purpose of a camera?
Because we know exactly why this is all here. It's because we want to benefit of the pipelines.
Okay.
We heard ourselves from the detachment that we heard there was going to be confrontations why this is set up here.
We're asking you to wait for Frida, please.
Do you understand that this is...
Where's Frida?
Do you understand that this is unceded Unistoten territory here?
Where's Frida?
Okay, I don't work. Like, so how about we just do that and, show us into nature and
Are you doing?
We're the only group that's really publicized out there opposing the pipelines and blocking pipeline workers from coming in here. So to me, when they're saying Northern British Columbia, we can guarantee it is us.
The interaction with one of your people was not appropriate. It's not appropriate for him to stand in front of the police and suggest that we can't cross the bridge or can't cross the public roadway. I informed him what my goal was.
This is Unistoten territory.
I mean, legally, it's your right. I mean, as the First Nations people, if this is your territory, to represent that, to voice that, to express that to anybody that wishes to come into the territory, or if they want to do work in the territory, to settle that matter through the courts.
We don't need that to prove that this is our land. It always has been. The province and everybody else needs to prove why they think they can access our land. We don't trust police because we're suspicious that your forces would come in to scope out our layout so that if there is an injunction, you guys will be better prepared on how you're going to deal with that. So they basically threatened anybody that tries to stop them from freely walking in is going to get arrested.
Martyrs.
Move! Move! Move!
the flashbangs and the non-lethal things, they will use lots of intimidation and getting up in your face and being really loud. It's really loud. And one of the things they do is this thing. It sucks. And so it's good to see what it looks like.
If you were to get arrested here, you're going to be charged with resisting arrest and probably some other large amount of conflated charges that have no legal basis whatsoever. My main takeaway was don't listen to anything the cops say about what they're going to charge you with, because it's going to be a whole bunch of lies and bull.
Say you are up on a ladder, or up on something high, there's cops trying to grab your feet, and you shake one off of your foot, and you make contact with their head, with your foot, you have assaulted a police officer. That's a felony charge. You know that before C-51, that was a major charge, it's big jail time. Now, after C-51, it's probably a lot bigger.
So we're sitting all in a circle.
So I think that C-51 especially has maybe stopped some newer activists from getting involved. They think that little charges are going to become big ones. They see that political protest, you can now get trumped up felony charges for things like conspiracy. But I think that seasoned activists realize that the government of Canada is going to use this as the first case so that they can throw a whole bunch of people in.
Well, this cabin was first built in 2009, and the reason why it was strategically put here was because this was the initial route for Pacific Trails Pipeline in Enbridge. So we put the cabin right here, right in the GPS route of where the pipeline route was proposed to go for both of those. Everywhere they lay that pipe, we will no longer have access to our territory, and we use its territories for berries, for medicines, for hunting. And viewing their pipeline route for our territory, it's all where our prime berry picking is on. There's so much at stake here for our people, and they say they developed C-51 for the purpose of protecting Canada's critical infrastructure projects. And what we're doing here is we're protecting our critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yay, an expert now. So we can order more fish then.
Yeah.
We've been told that cops come in and take this camp down. And just from seeing the RCMP have been doing to other First Nations that have been trying to defend their lands. You see it on the news all the time where they're pepper spraying elders and arresting people. So you know it is possible that they would do such a thing. And I don't think they care who's here. And we're here canning fish.
Big one. Yeah.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Where are you? What are you doing here?
We're just from the Coastal Gas Tank. We're doing non-invasive testing.
Non-invasive work leads to permits. Permits leads to projects that we do not approve of. It's going to destroy our lands. And the company's already been told you don't have permission to be here, so I'm going to ask you guys to leave.
So are our crews safe to be here?
Yeah, you got to leave. Do I look like I'm trying to harm you?
No, I'm not.
I'm peacefully asking you to leave because you're trespassing. So please get back in your chopper and leave.
I am Namox. I am the highest ranking chief of the Tayu, one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en. On behalf of Namox, Father Clan, to Frida, we ask permission to come and join you. We have come here to be with you to make sure you understand you are doing the right thing. Masai kill.
for a while, even though we got a lot of verbal support, we didn't get physical support out here, and it means a lot that we have hereditary chiefs coming here supporting what we're doing and backing up what we've been telling media. Our hereditary system is what governs our land.
Representing the Pacific Trail Pipeline Project. We're here today to talk to you about doing work on your land, and we're requesting access onto your territory so that Wet'suwet'en people can work and to see benefits from the project. We allow us to access the territory here today.
We've already said no to these projects and that no pipelines will come on the territory, and regardless if you've got other Wet'suwet'en members working for you, does not give you access to our territory. These pipeline projects will wipe out vast tracts of land that will prevent us from doing our berry picking, our medicines. That's what you'll be wiping out. And our salmon is our staple food. You'll be wiping out all our food sources. I don't eat store-bought meat. Everything I eat comes off my land. All my medicines, I get off the land. I don't go to the doctor. And you're trying to convince us to give up our way of life so that you can reap the benefits for government and investors, and while you're throwing crumbs to some of the partners that sign on, it's just basically crumbs.
So what you're telling us is that you will not allow us access onto the territory. We brought you an offering, we've left some water, some tobacco.
No thanks. We've got clean water right there that's we can drink, and that's pollution, the plastic that adds to the landfill. So you could take your water because we don't want that.
Okay, so that video is over, so we're going back to the actual lesson now. I just figured to chime in and say that I found that very informational. So back to the actual thing. I might not do the whole video, I might stop early. But, so we're back.
Yeah. From the gas station, bottled water, what is it, Rodrigo y Julia cigars.
What an insult.
It was an insult, yes.
What an insult.
Yeah, so.
Those guys, just because they have money, a bottle, 24 bottles of water is going to lend access to them to that land. What's the wrong with those people? We voted against it, and here they are at it again. They wanted, forget what we just said in this last election.
Yeah.
We don't want this thing getting to our state either. And I'm not going to benefit from this money. Are you? How many of you in class is going to benefit from this pipeline?
Right.
I'm not.
Right.
My grandson is a main guide. He's going to lose his way of life because who wants to see roads when they come to see wildlife with him?
Right.
This is way I hope that the federal will cancel the permit.
I don't know.
Because they are taking it to cancel the permit by the what happened is CMP is trying to give us a lollipop. Because remember, also, nothing wrong with them, but the people that they are trying to control up north, they're not very educated people, and that's not demeaning anybody. It's just saying what we see there.
On average, right.
As we go north. So they think...
Sorry, Mimi, go ahead.
They think that we're going to have jobs forever. We're not.
Yeah.
Once the project's done, our land is ruined, we're done. We're done.
So I agree.
Not as royalty.
I do understand, and I think there are similarities between what we just saw and let's say the CMP corridor, right? Or I was thinking of the Standing Rock or Black Rock? No, Standing Rock. Was that North Dakota? Around the same time, actually, in 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. Excuse me, sorry. So what these groups are doing, right, whether it's in Maine or in British Columbia or wherever, is a social movement, right? It's people who are consciously and in an organized way trying to stop or resist social change, right, in this case. Stop or resist, a pipeline. So all social movements, whether they're about pipelines or not, are identified by two factors. I do want you to know this for the exam, but so first is how much change they want. So limited or radical. Some social movements are pushing for limited change, like they just want to change one thing, like the pipeline, for example, right? The focus of the social movement is not on solar power or on infrastructure. Well, it is about infrastructure, but not about roads or about education. It's about a pipeline, right? One thing they want to change or stop from changing. Whereas radical social movements want like total transformation of something. And so the terms we use to describe these kinds of social movements are either reform or revolutionary. They're reform movements if they push for limited change, and they're revolutionary movements if they're pushing for radical change, a lot of change. So that's one factor, how much change a social movement wants. The other factor is what we call the scope of the change, meaning who does the change apply to? Is it an individual level change or a societal level change? I'm going to leave this up. But the terms for that is expressive or instrumental. Expressive social movements are all about changing an aspect of an individual, whereas instrumental social movements deal with changing something at the societal level. So if you were to make a little chart with reform and revolutionary movements, actually those are the column, or the rows, right? Reform and revolutionary movements on one side of the chart, and instrumental and expressive movements on the other side of the chart, it would look something like this. So if you have the outline, it's a little easier to see, but sorry. So the very first box is where instrumental and reform movements overlap. So that would be social movements that want limited change, partial change, and they want it to occur at the instrumental level, which is the societal level. So social movements that fall into this category would be things like the civil rights movement. Right? The civil rights movement wanted partial change in society, right? Specifically change related to race and inequality. But they wanted that change to happen at the structural level, right? They wanted society to change, laws and rules and expectations and norms, right, at the societal level to change. So an instrumental reform movement example might be civil rights, or the anti-abortion movement, right? They want partial change, specifically related to abortion legality, but they want that change to happen at the structural level of trying to make a law, right, or uphold a law. Whereas, continue across there, right? So now we have still in the reform row, but now under expressive, right? So there we have partial change, still only about one part of society, but change at the individual level, not at the structural level. So an example of an expressive reform movement might be the Temperance Movement, the social movement that led to prohibition of alcohol in the 1930, right? So it was partial change. It was only about people's alcohol behavior, right? And the change they wanted was individual behavior to change. They wanted people to stop drinking. That's what Women's Christian Temperance Movement was about. So reform, because it was about alcohol, but expressive because it was about people's behavior. Does that make sense? The bottom row, revolutionary and instrumental. So revolutionary change means total change. It means, a revision of how the society is working, and in this case, at the structural level. So an instrumental revolutionary movement might include something like the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where they meant to overthrow the aristocracy that had ruled Russia for centuries, the monarchy, the czar, the czars, and change the social structure completely to a new, more socialist type of society, right? Or Islamic fundamentalism, right, is another instrumental revolutionary movement where they want total change of society to adopt, various kinds of Islamic law, but across the social structure, right? Not just in any one person's faith or whatever. And then finally, an expressive revolutionary movement, the lower right-hand corner, wants total change because it's revolutionary, but in individuals, not in the social structure. So an example of an expressive revolutionary movement might be something akin to a cult, right? Where a cult demands a total change in a person, but only in a person, not in the society, bigger society, right? So if you join a cult, you may have to change, but you're not, they're not trying to change the world, they're just trying to change individual people. Does that make sense? So how much change is reform or revolutionary? And who the change applies to, the scope of the change, is expressive or instrumental. So what do you think about the Unistoten pipeline blockade? Are they reform or revolutionary, do you think? Reform or revolutionary? Are they trying to create change in one area of society or total change of a society?
Only that area.
I think so. I think
they want to, this here doesn't belong to you, that's ours, so we want to change this here.
Correct. And I mean, they may have some bigger, dreams as well, but I think in this case right there, specifically trying to deal with the social change of a pipeline, and they don't want this pipeline, and they're trying to stop this change, right?
Yes.
But it's reform, right? It's a limited amount of change they're pushing for.
Lorian.
Yes.
You're probably too young, but about Wounded Knee. When Marlon Brando organized and took over for those same reasons, they want to take over territory that didn't belong to them, and the government was insisting on it. And Marlon Brando, with all his money, all his charisma, he stood there by his people. He did not let go.
I have to say, I thought you said Marlon Brando at first, and I was like, what? What movie is this? Yes, I understand. Yes.
No, Marlon Brando.
Yes, for Wounded Knee. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. That was him. What's that? 68, 70?
I thought it was a lot older than that, but I don't know.
It could be 68. Could be 1968.
Okay, that's probably why I'm confused.
Did he look up?
No, we don't know the exact date, but we know.
But you know what I'm talking about.
That there was a historical event at Wounded Knee, but then there was also this protest later. Yeah.
Yes. But the natives, they held on firm They didn't, and the government was on them.
And so,
on them.
so their protest, right, was about a specific aspect of social life, right? Not total change. So they were.
Remember, they were fighting also for healthcare, for housing. They weren't involved in North South Dakota.
Right.
They were involved in territory.
Right.
Themselves.
So that would be an example of a reform movement, right?
Yes. It was a reform movement for the wounded knee of nation.
Right.
Okay?
So.
Yeah.
Yes. So then the second question is, the Unistoten, the group that we were watching with the pipeline, right? What do we think about the scope of the change that they're trying to encounter? Are they trying to make change in individuals' behavior, or are they trying to make change at the level of society? There's not a right answer to this, but what do you think?
I would say you could actually make an argument. They are specifically fighting with that oil company, but they're trying to get society in general to honor their sovereignty.
Right.
So it's kind of both at the same time.
That's fair. I would say in situations like that, we would call them instrumental, right? Because by changing the social structure, it will filter down to individual behavior, right? So it's like an umbrella. I'm with you. I understand your argument. So I think in that case, we would call them instrumental.
It's the same thing with the Love Canal that was instrumental, wasn't it?
Correct. They wanted big change, but about one thing, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Whereas, take for example the civil, I was going to say civil rights, but I didn't mean civil rights. I lost my train of thought. For an example of an expressive, of a revolutionary movement. What was my example? Bolsheviks was my example, right? Where the Bolsheviks wanted change, not just to the economic situation, but to the economic, political, social, educational, governmental spheres, right? They wanted total change to the society, not just about, alcohol or just about pipelines or sovereignty or whatever. So I think I would agree that the Unistotens are reform and instrumental movement, right? So they would live here in this box alongside, the civil rights movement or something like that. So successful social movements, and in particular reform movements, because they are the most common. The reason I was having trouble coming up with an example of a revolutionary movement is they're very few and far between. They do exist. We call them revolutions often, right? But most social movements that we're familiar with are reform movements. And so in general, they make great strides in 3 general areas. Culture, usually through changing education, beliefs, or behaviors. New organizations and institutions, creating new organizations that continue to generate change. So, for example, the civil rights movement, right? So the civil rights movement, not only did it produce changes in culture, right? We changed our education system in certain ways to both reflect more, but not all, of the history of African Americans, as well as we reformed educational acceptance and higher education practices. There were changes to beliefs and behaviors around society about equality and that kind of thing. But the civil rights movement didn't just change culture, it also created new organizations that continue to generate change, like the NAACP, right? Or like the Congressional Black Caucus, which is a group of black political leaders in both houses of Congress that try to work together to create change, no matter what political party they're from, create change related that's important to African Americans. And then finally, social policy and legislation, where new laws are enacted, old ones are struck down, or programs are created or ended, taxes are levied or rescinded, right? But, changes to social policy and legislation. Another example of a reform movement that we might be familiar with is the women's movement of the 1970s, right? And so, there were changes to culture in the form of things like Title IX, military, accepting women, various equal pay, pushes. There were creation of new organizations from the women's movement, most notably the National Organization for Women, NOW, and then social policy and legislation trying to enact, like I said, equal pay. Down here is a better example of equal pay because it's a law. Or striking down old laws like the law that gave a loophole for husbands sexually assaulting their wives. That was changed in the 1970s as a result of the women's movement, and so on and so forth. Right? So you get the idea? So I can't give a full picture of what has happened to the Unistotens since 2015, but I can fill in some of it. They had a video that summarized their 2015 through 2019 era on their website, and I can't find it anymore. The link is dead. So I did go to the Unistoten site. This is their website. There's a link to it on Brightspace for anyone who wants to check them out. And they've got information about where they came from and what they're doing and why they're protesting pipelines. But the two things that I found the most helpful were there's a timeline. Hang on, where is it?
No pipelines.
Yeah, timeline. So here it is here. So they actually started this work as far back as 1997, citing a Supreme Court case that gave, of course, tribal areas the right to the land and to steward it. So this goes through all the different times, right? In the year 2000, they established their first checkpoint. We joined, the story in 2015. This was when the hereditary chiefs visited, right? We saw that in the video. Since then, they've created a bunch of camps for both youths and those who are training in construction techniques. And so the way they trained construction people was by having them build like a bunkhouse for people living at the camp, right? So they did that. Then in 2018, an injunction was served to the Unistoten camp by the government, telling them they had to stop and they had to leave and let the pipeline be built. Yeah. A few weeks later, really, in 2019, the RCMP, that's the police, right? The tactical unit assaulted the checkpoint, not the camp itself, but the checkpoint on the bridge. And that brought a lot of international information, a lot of international visibility to the project, and it became, newsworthy and things like that. That's where they stop on their website. Part of the problem was the pandemic in 2020. Sorry for the scrolling. So they have talked about how their things have shifted during the pandemic. For the first year of the pandemic, of course, they couldn't have volunteers. They couldn't have anyone doing that work. But at the same time, pipelines were allowed to keep going because they are critical infrastructure, right? So they kept building. But they do have here on their website some videos about their groups and about, how they've continued this work, but I don't know what the current status of the pipeline is on their land and if it's been fully built or not. Here's the building of that bunkhouse that I was talking about. I'm going to show just one of the videos here. You can look at the other ones if you'd like, but it would be
We want to bring people out here, run healing programs so we can heal our people, make them whole again, reconnect them to the land, then they're going to be more successful in their healing journeys. And if they're healed and healthy, then they're connected to the land, they'll be concerned for the land. So that's what our hopes are for this space. Bring healing to more of our Indigenous folks so that they can be reconnected. You reconnect to your land, you're reconnecting to your ancestors because that's where they are. So whenever you hear heal the people, heal the land, you're going to think Unistoten camp.
So they have not rebranded exactly, but they changed the focus of their camp to now be something that is integrated into the spiritual life of the people, so that it's much harder for them to just be like, you're here just to protest the pipeline and you have to get out of here. Now it's like a destination that's part of the culture, and so that's kind of been their approach when faced with like challenges. So again, I don't know exactly where things stand today, but feel free to do some research on your own if you'd like. If you want to learn more, the website again is linked right on Brightspace. Not here because that's the assignments page. That's for next week. Sorry. All right, so we have today. We have a link right here to the Unistom Camp's website, so you can find it that way. If you want to learn more, you can Google them as well. That brings me to our bonus assignment for today. Your participation assignment is not required. If you've done all the other ones for the class, you can get you'll have full credit for participation. But if you want to earn some bonus points, I have 2 questions here for you about social change and social movements, which is, what is something that you want to see changed in society, and how do you think that change can be achieved, right, using some of the, tips and tricks we've learned today or whatever. So if you would like to fill this out, you can get up to 3 points towards your grade, but that's 3 free points just added to your overall total. And if you don't, that's fine too. So does that make sense? So your only real homework is to finish your public issue projects. They are due on Wednesday the 8th, so 6 days from today. And then next Thursday we'll have a review session at 1 o'clock if you want to come.
Alright, so the rest of that's just stuff for me. I just did the important stuff, so thank you for watching.